once again, not my van. Welcome to this video. It's going to be about like narrative justifications of mechanics. A little on like extrapolating from mechanics, and I guess why things are written. We'll get there. So, I want to start the video with a little talk about a certain mechanic in a game that's not D&D. I've been playing Hades 2 recently. It's in early access. It's a good game. So in the game, final boss is Kronos. Spoilers, I guess. It's in all the promotional art. Kronos, the Titan of time, father of all the Olympian gods, or most of them. I think it. Don't worry about it. And in his boss fight, there is a mechanic where you can't pause the game because he's the Titan of time. You pause the game and he's like, "Oh no," and he just unpauses it, basically. And what does that mechanic actually do? What does it accomplish? Because ultimately, a mechanic should accomplish something, like whether it's creating fun interactions, causing players to think about what they're doing, or taking a risk and feeling rewarded, whatever it is. And all that mechanic actually does is, one, it's kind of a funny joke, like, oh, the Titan of time, you can't pause. And then the actual implication is, if you're a type of player that maybe needs to pause for whatever reason, whether you have some sort of disability where like your hands cramp up or you need to rest them for like 5 minutes sometimes, or if you're like me and you have a new baby, I gotta go check that baby sometimes. I gotta be able to pause the game. So all that really does is punish players like that. They're like, okay, I guess my run's over now. I gotta go do whatever. And ultimately, it's a single player game. There's no real reason to have a mechanic like that. Multiplayer games, online games, yeah, you can't pause those for other reasons. Like, that makes perfect sense. But, a single player game, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to pause. That said, it is a really cute reference, and I love the idea. But, then also, there is a feature you can unlock a little later on in the game that does allow you to pause. Like, you can lift that restriction. And the weird thing is, it's buried fairly late into the progression. Like, it's not something you can, beat the game one time and then grab for free. It's, you gotta beat the game a few times and gather enough resources to unlock this power-up, I guess we'll call it. So it's kind of weirdly, you gotta invest a lot to be able to lift that restriction. And a lot of the discussion I've seen about it is there should probably be an accessibility feature that you can just say, no, I need to be able to pause sometimes, not oh, it would be nice. No, I need to be able to pause, so otherwise I'm just not going to play the game sometimes. I've definitely done that, when it's, quote, my turn to caretake the baby. I just don't play that game if the baby's asleep, but I'm still the one on watch. I just don't play Hades 2. I just don't play that game because there's a chance that I'll get to the end boss or maybe I will play the game, and then before I get to Kronos, I'll just quit out and do something else. But, that's what that mechanic actually does. So why do mechanics like that exist, where something's narratively extrapolated, but it just causes problems? It doesn't enrich the gameplay experience in any way. It just causes problems. Now, I'll touch on some other mechanics, and most of them aren't quite that bad. this mechanic with Chronos not letting you pause it's a purely negative thing. It doesn't really enrich the experience in any way. Other mechanics, you can argue more for that, but and then I guess also the opposite of that, like something that's purely a gameplay contrivance, sometimes can bring down the narrative. Like, for example, I just watched a little video from the Elden Ring DLC, and I'm not going to have any spoilers, but they were fighting the final boss, and they used a Spirit Ash summon of, I guess this is minor spoilers, like this new kind of stone golem that's in the DLC, and it has like crazy high physical resistance. You can only really attack it from the back, and even then it still has high resistance, but like you can at least hit it from the back. There's like a crystal sitting in its ass crack, and you punch that, and then it'll fall over and you can get a crit, you can get a riposte. But they use this Spirit Ash against the final boss, and because of the gameplay contrivance against the player, like, okay, it can't take that much damage because the player has to struggle to fight it. Well, the final boss had basically did no damage to this thing. Like, the Ash summon might have, like, I don't know, 4,000, 5,000 HP, like, whatever. And the final boss, who's normally, like, it'll take out like half of your health in a single hit. And it attacks very rapidly. Against the Spirit Ash, it was doing like 60 damage a hit. Like, what the fuck is that? So the player just stood back and let the Spirit Ash just do the fight. And as far as the lore is concerned, narratively, there is no way that would happen. Like, this is the final boss, a god, something, blah, 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 all titles, against some random-ass stone golem, and the stone golem wins. That's a gameplay contrivance. But it's one of those things that's kind of necessary sometimes, and as a virtue, or a product of a bunch of other mechanics, like the Spirit Ash summonable spirit system that drags those like gameplay properties along, it causes things like this. Like, if that enemy were not a Spirit Ash, I wouldn't be talking about this. But because they are, and it is, I am. But something I've also noticed in my play group is, in my D&D, going back to D&D now, in my 5e group, there's a lot of, I guess, what I'll call narrative extrapolation. For example, last night, during the fight, my character got levitated by one of the enemies. And so I'm just levitating up in the air. I can't do anything. I'm just floating there. And that's not the aspect of levitate I want to discuss. Some enemies went to attack my levitating character. They're like, all right, they're going to have advantage because you're levitating. And it's like, well, levitate doesn't do that. All it does is make you float there. Like, you can still defend yourself. You're not restrained. You're not stunned. You're not incapacitated. You don't have any of these other properties. So there's no reason they should get advantage. It's like, well, yeah, but you're just floating there. Yeah, but the spell doesn't say I get that. And that's where a lot of problems with 5e kind of start. Like, it's written in this natural way, such that you have no problem kind of extrapolating these narrative properties out of spells and mechanics. Even if the spell or mechanic doesn't state something, your brain naturally goes like, oh, well, because of X, Y happens, even though the spell doesn't do Y. And apparently they've been running that in their other games like that for a long time. Now, the other issue there is that makes levitate way too powerful. Like, if it does that, because also levitate, it's like, if you're affected by it, you're done. You're out of you don't get a save to do anything else. You're just helpless there. That's incredibly powerful for a level 2 spell. If it were to grant advantage on attacks against you, then yeah, I would say either make it a 3rd, possibly 4th level spell, because it takes you out of the fight in the same way friggin' Banishment does. Banishment has a better save, but it takes you out of the fight in the same way Banishment does, but enemies can also attack you at advantage. Like, no, that is not a 2nd level spell, because the affected creature does not get a save on any of their turns to resist this effect again. They're just in it. Or keep it a 2nd level spell and make it so, like, either at the start or end of your turns, you get another save to resist the effect. One of those. Now, theoretically, there are ways to get around levitate if you're affected by it. Like, you could pull out a rope and snag something and pull yourself. There's things you can do, but it's still a very powerful effect for a 2nd level spell. And additionally, because of this like natural extrapolation, a lot of players tend to do. There's definitely other mechanics that will cause players to do these types of things. Like, there's, even in my playgroup, there's been a lot of confusion, or not confusion, back and forth about like grappling. Like, kind of been running it like, sometimes it's grappling is you just make an attack roll, and if it hits, you're grappled. Well, that's a specific mechanic that certain monsters have and other things, and that could be why the DM runs it that way, because they're so used to it working that way for monsters. But for players, per the rules, it's you go to make a grapple check, you roll athletics, and the target rolls athletics or acrobatics to escape it on the initial attempt. And if you succeed, or like if your number's higher than theirs, then you grapple them, and then they can like use their action to try to break out, which nobody ever does. So, like, also, like, that kind of makes sense, right? Like, to grapple someone, all you really got to do is touch them. But, like, you don't have to like get through their armor or anything like that. So, you know, but then I think earlier editions like 3.5 had like they had like your normal AC, they had your touch AC, and they had your flat foot AC, which was basically like AC was normal, and then your touch AC was basically just your dex, like just 10 plus your dex. It's just how hard it is to touch you with something, and certain spells and effects like a grapple just used your touch AC, which makes a lot of sense to me. And then other effects only used your flat-footed AC, like you don't factor in your dex at all. So, like, if you're someone with heavy armor, your flat-foot AC is basically the same as your regular AC. But 5e doesn't do that. It's just contested athletics checks, which, you know, a lot of stuff kind of comes out in the wash and the arbitration of making these checks. It's like, okay, you make a check, okay, well, you succeed by a lot, so you get a really good handle on their arm and torso, and like it's a really good grapple. Or if you barely succeed, it's more like you just snag like their coat and pull them in to the grapple, and then it becomes a normal grapple. Like, it's not like you get a weaker grapple or something. But that could be something that might get us extrapolated. There's got to be more of these that I'm thinking of. Something like Danger Sense for the Barbarian. That's something that gets extrapolated because it states you get advantage on dex checks against dex saves against effects you can see. Well, sometimes that means sometimes a DM will roll like, okay, if you're not explicitly looking in that direction, you don't get the bonus. You don't get advantage on this save, which kind of makes sense, but it's also kind of a problem with the way that's worded. Like, if it's danger sense, why is it only things you can see? Like, just grant advantage to prevent, like, rules discussions like that. Like, fringe scenarios where it's like, oh, well, because of X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. And that's a pretty big problem with how 5e is worded, like I said earlier. There's a lot of mechanics there's just a lot of stuff in the game that relies on, quote, natural language, which is a problem because natural language is very open to interpretation. It's very easy for one player to interpret it one way and another player to interpret it another way. Like, this is a really extreme example, but something like prestidigitation, I've seen this joke, but this is a joke that's emblematic of the way the system is written. Prestidigitation can warm an object you choose. It doesn't say by how much. So it's like, okay, I warm it to the point of nuclear fusion and create a bomb. Yeah, like, no, that's nonsense. But, like, that doesn't make any sense. One, because it's a cantrip. It shouldn't be able to do something like that, like, mechanically. But something being a cantrip is a gameplay contrivance to limit its power. Like, it has narrative reasons, but it's also a gameplay contrivance. Sometimes we limit stuff based on what level spell they are, or say, create water. I create water in the guy's lungs. Well, the spell doesn't say you can do that. But if you extrapolate it, you should be able to do that. I think that's also one of the spells that says a point within range, so you don't have to see it. Wait, no. I'm going to get some food. So you don't need to be able to see the point. So, oh yeah, someone's lungs is a point within range. Like, no. It's a first level spell. It can't do that. Nonsense. But that's the type of gameplay, like, narrative extrapolation that happens. In those cases, it's because players want immense power for free. But it's like, that's kind of the idea behind, like, gameplay contrivances, and why I try to stick to the rules as much as possible. Like, for example, I'll rule things like, yes, when my character was levitated, it's like, no, that doesn't grant advantage for these reasons. And then the effect ended later, and it's like, okay, well, when this effect ends, I drift softly back to the ground. I don't plummet, which was another thing that the way they ruled, but that's written in the spell at the end. Like, it's like, well, but the spell isn't ending, it's being canceled. It's like, that's the same as it's ending. And, that's a consequence of the natural language. Like, quote, the spell ends isn't like a hard enough tag or property that it can be interpreted in certain ways. So, yeah, I guess that's all I really wanted to... I'm just kind of going in circles a little bit now, but that's all I really wanted to discuss on this topic. Might have a little more later if I think of it, but that's it.